evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Chandigarh Lalit Kala Akademi welcomes you to its grand annual offering, a sumptuous week-long banquet of art with the choicest fare from leading artists and contemporary masters. This year being the 100th birth anniversary of the renowned Amrita Sher-Gil, the Art Week has been dedicated in memory of her contribution to art. It is a privilege to have amongst us Shri K.K. Sharma, the advisor to the administrator, Chandigarh Administration, to inaugurate this Art Week. May I request Mr. Diwan Manna to welcome you all.
As we all know, I don't really need to tell all of you about Amrita Sher-Gil. She was an icon and she was somebody who belonged to this soil. Though she was not born here, but be it Lahore, it was part of us. Then she went to Shimla. Then now, Shimla was also a capital of Punjab. Now Chandigarh is the capital of Punjab, so we can somehow claim that she is ours. I welcome Mrs. Anjolie Ela Menon the second time to the Lalit Kala Akademi. She is so generous, so kind, that whenever we have requested her, in spite of all the engagements, she always says yes. She never says no to Chandigarh. Thank you so much. We thought of this festival long time ago because we wanted to dedicate something to Amrita Sher-Gil ji. Now, Chandigarh, as we all know, is a city which has intellectuals, scholars, writers, painters, theatre personalities, all kinds of people who are interested in the arts as such. And then we thought, why not have a festival in which thinkers, writers, curators, critics, historians, and artists, they get together and discuss whatever is ailing, whatever is happening in the field of art. Now, I do not need to speak about Anjali ji. She is one of the most innovative, most creative, most up-to-date, most contemporary, most productive, artists amongst us, and probably very young in terms of her thinking, because that's why there are other artists also. We have requested her to be amongst this group, because apart from being creatively active for more than 5 to 6 decades, she's still contemporary. She still thinks about the contemporary themes and times. Thank you very much for being with us.
Sir, may I request you to please come on stage and formally inaugurate the festival as well as release the catalogue for the Amrita Sher-Gil National Art Week.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Its depth or density, translucence or opacity form the nuances of one's whole creative output. It is with color that one sings, with color that one plummets to the depths of sorrow and pain. So says Anjolie Ela Menon. Her tryst with color began in the 1940s as a student of the Lawrence School, Lovedale, where the art classes under the tutelage of Sushil Mukherjee were, in her own words, an oasis of beauty and calm. Students were given total freedom, their imagination kindled by pictures and tales of impressionist painters and their artworks. I make particular mention of this as Amrita Sher-Gil's biography refers to her unfortunate first experience with an art teacher who was so strict and such a perfectionist that Amrita soon lost her interest in drawing. But in Ms. Anjali's case, her teacher enabled her to make up her mind to wield the palette knife and not the surgeon's scalpel, as her parents had planned. A brief stint at the J.J. School of Art followed. There was acquaintance with the works of Hussain and Mohan Samant, both of whom influenced her greatly. Modigliani and Amrita Sher-Gil were other inspirations at that time. At 18, her own works were showcased in solo exhibitions in Mumbai and Delhi. Impressed by her creative genius, the French government offered her a scholarship to study in Paris, where she learned fresco painting. Western modes of thought instilled by her American grandmother were now supplemented by travels in Europe, leading to a study of Romanesque and Byzantine art. The eclecticism of Ms. Menon's education can be gauged from her study of English literature at Miranda House in Delhi, her keen interest in jazz music, plays, and Ingmar Bergman's films. A similar eclecticism in terms of styles and themes is visible in Ms. Menon's paintings over the years. If marriage and motherhood produced a series of Madonnas in Child, it was a trip to Russia that resulted in icon-like paintings. European influences unfolded in dramatic visuals of nudes in verdant settings. Interestingly, Menon finds her muse in lively urban spaces, in Mumbai's Muhammad Ali Road or the INA Market, Delhi. "I'm quite obsessed with flea markets," she confesses. Though she normally prefers to work with oil on masonite, she's also worked with media such as glass, acrylic, computers, and ceramics. Recipient of the Padma Shri in 2000 and honors by the French government, she has held over 40 solo shows in India and abroad, including a 6-month solo exhibition at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. Her commissioned works grace many public spaces. Today, she will speak to us about the making of a mural.
At the outset, I have to thank Manna for inviting me. And it wasn't that I was being generous in coming. I come to Chandigarh and to Lalit Kala Akademi because of the way that Manna organizes these events with so much meticulous care that I'm very proud to be part of any of these enterprises because he's really doing a wonderful job. Thank you so much, Manna. It's also lovely to be back in Chandigarh, which is, I think, perhaps now in the urban mess that is occurring all over India, perhaps the only planned and beautiful city left. And to be here amongst the wonderful work of Corbusier and of Rock Garden. When Swami talked about foreign curators coming here in maybe 15 to 20 years ago to assess what was going on in the Indian art scene, there was a woman called Catherine Q, which some older people might have known, who had come to India to have a look and to report back to, I think she was with the MoMA in those days in New York, as to whether there was anything exciting going on in India. And she said, the only exciting thing that I saw in India was Nek Chand. And, but I don't think we should forget Nek Chand and his work, because I think that it was very much prophetic. His work was very prophetic. When you see the kind of work that is being done today, which is not paintings to be hung on a wall, but work that has been made out of junk, and this whole amazing rock garden that he made, and the sheer originality of it, I think that we have to honor Nek Chand, and I think you're very lucky that you live in Chandigarh and are living here amongst his works. What I'm going to do is just go through very briefly these slides. I don't want to make this very long because I know that it's going to be a long evening for everybody. Now that, we talked about Sushil Kumar Mukherjee, who was my art teacher in Lovedale, where I studied and I later taught there. He was an extremely inspiring man. He was sort of a Renaissance man. He painted, he did sculpture, he played the flute, he produced our plays in school, and we were very lucky. When I was talking to somebody today and said, this new generation of artists has the whole world as their oyster. They can download the Louvre today, and they can download Museum of Modern Art tomorrow, and everything is there on the screen. But for us, it was Sushil Mukherjee's 6 precious art books, which were our learning experience of a small coterie of students, whom he rather favored. He would let us look at these books. In fact, the first influence in my life was Van Gogh, through one little book of Van Gogh that Mukherjee had. And this was my portrait of him. I must have been about, it's an AED, so I wasn't married then. I must have been about 16 or 17 when I painted that. Next. When I was around 18 or 19, Pupul Jaikar, who was also a family friend, but she was my mentor in many ways. Both Hussein and Pupul mentored me in a wonderful way. She took me with her to New York, just before I went to Paris actually. And she was a great friend of Edgar Kaufman, who was then the director of the Museum of Modern Art. And Edgar had what was called Falling Waters, which was Frank Lloyd Wright house, which jutted out over a forest. And we had the great privilege of going and actually living in that house. It's now become a museum. And one had thought very naively when one was that young that America's streets were paved with gold, until I was taken by Pupul and two other friends of hers to listen to some jazz in Harlem. And there I painted this whole Harlem series because I found great parallels to what was happening in our own country, the poverty and the Harlem. It was a real, terribly poor ghetto where there was wonderful jazz being played. And I did this whole series in Edgar Kaufman's. I had a barn full of paints which he used to have young painters come and work there. And I painted this whole series called Harlem. Next. Then I come back, and we jump a bit, I come back and I get a scholarship to go to Paris. And I've been talked of by many critics as being a complete maverick. I never fitted into any of the movements of Indian art. I didn't belong in any school or sector of thought or processes. And surprisingly enough, there I was exposed to Picasso and Braque and all the moderns in Paris. But instead of I was very homesick, and instead of responding to that, I sort of plunged backwards into time, and I was very taken with the early Christian art, where I saw these stark figures. My friend Shama Zaidi and I were in Paris together, and another friend, and we would hitchhike every weekend to some Romanesque cathedral or monument. And I was very influenced by both Vézelay and many places like Chartres, which had absolutely beautiful, and the starkness of those figures influenced me and continue to influence me even now in my work. Next. I'm sorry, the chronology is a bit different. This is after I got married, when I came back from Paris, and that was when I was expecting my first child. Next. What really drew me to the Romanesque art was, as I said, the very strong frontal figures, which it wasn't particularly involved with perspective. And I saw Christ as, he came from the Middle East, and I saw him as a black bearded son of a carpenter. And those early Romanesque Christs and Madonnas were like that, very, very strong, and very unlike the blonde and blue-eyed version that is now put out by the church, where I don't think Christ was either blonde or blue-eyed, also soft-looking. He was really a very strong, and I've painted many, many portraits of Christ, or imagined ones. There again. This was painted much later when we'll come to that soon, when I had started to paint this Open Heart series. Next. These were painted, there were years when I spent in Russia. We were in Vladivostok, where my husband was in the Navy, and he was bringing back submarines for India from there. And we spent 2 extremely bleak years there. And the only aspect that I didn't mind, it was bitterly cold, 30 degrees below zero. There was absolutely no culture, there was no theater, there was no music. So on Sundays, I would escape from the children, who were very small, and go to the local church, which was a wooden church, and it had icons from floor to ceiling, because many people would bring their icons to the church when they were dying, because their children, it was the height of the Soviet Union, their children did not believe in God, and would probably desecrate these icons. So I used to go there, both for the music and to look at these wonderful paintings. Next. Another Madonna. Next. I call this the Madonna of Merriweather Road. We spent many years in Bombay, and around at the back of the Taj there was a huge, in those days, the days of the hippies, there were these hippies who were constantly on drugs and very, very ragged and poor. But this family used to sell newspapers at the crossroads, and under the grime and filth of her visage, there was this very beautiful woman, and I painted her in a whole series of paintings. Next. This again is a very very new painting. I now have my studio in the Nizamuddin Basti, and I call this the Goat People, the series which is called the Goat People, because when my doors of my studio are open on a hot day, the goats come in and they eat up all the drawings because they like eating paper. We celebrate, we're just next to the Dargah, and we live by the sounds of the Azan 4 times a day. And these are the people who are in the Basti and who continue to inspire me now. But there is a certain connection between this man and the rather iconic religious figures that I used to paint. But that the stillness and the full frontal solidity of the figure continues through, even when the inspiration changes, subject matter changes. Next. The theme of the mother and child, the mother and the son. I had 2 sons. One whole period of my work was full of their toys, which were shown in the paintings. The adjuncts to the paintings where the toys lay about and the kites flew in the sky. Aeroplanes, kites and balloons fill those paintings of that era when the boys were growing up. It's also a device which I often use of a picture within a picture. And here you see the reflection of the woman on the table, where they perhaps are sitting and maybe about to have a meal or play a game. Next. In the 90s, I had sort of got a little bit, we all get jaded and we get stuck in the trap of our own, the cliches of our own making. And I felt that I wanted to do something different. And this was a series where I very deliberately engaged with the kitsch of calendar art, of the circus and of the street. Because I still feel even today that we feel that we are high artists, where the calendar art is the low art, which many artists have in the past despised. But I saw in them a certain skill and beauty in these calendar paintings, and I was surprised to find that the calendar artists, quite apart from the art world that we know, also have a whole art world in which they exist. And for instance, if one of them, they usually hang out in places like Sivakasi, where if one of them, their Ganesh, the image of the Ganesh is selected, it goes into a print run of 50 lakhs sometimes, 50 lakhs images. And they have these fantastic machines from Germany. So I got a little view into their world as well. And their paintings were also that man would also get 30 or 40 lakhs for that painting, which was kept in very air-cooled conditions, temperature-controlled conditions, because it became so precious to the people who produced those calendars. And after all, that is the ubiquitous art that adorns every puja room in the country. We'll go into that later on Ravi Varma's influence. But here, I also used the gold and silver leaf technique of the Tanjore paintings. But in this whole series, I use them in a more contemporary manner. Sometimes the gold was used for the specks, or as you'll see next, please. I went through a whole phase where maybe about 10 years or so when I painted the nude. But I've also had great debates with Sousa, I remember, because I said that as a woman, one would paint the nude with a sense of empathy, and these were the sisters of the we are the sisters of the same sorority. She is me and I am her. That feeling dominated my approach and the approach of many women painters to the human, especially to the female nude. Whereas I used to say to Sousa, I said, well, you are the voyeur, the one who's tearing the woman apart and exposing her in a very sometimes derogatory way. He obviously had a love-hate relationship with the women in his life, because he often painted them in a way that I don't think any woman would. I once asked Sousa, Sousa, why do you paint women with these exaggerated breasts? So he said, Anjali, if you knew the women whom I know, you'd know that this is no exaggeration. Next, please. Desmond Doig once had me on the cover of his magazine, and he wrote, I think that Anjolie Menon is a necrophiliac, because there was this element of necrophilia in my work, particularly when a painting is seemingly pleasant, you will find an unpleasant detail which makes me the maverick that I am. Next. When my husband finally retired, we would always live near the sea because he was in the Navy. We both suddenly really missed the sea, and I did a whole series of paintings called Stories of the Sea, and this is one of them. You see the sea in the background, and the woman is really torn in half, wanting to be somewhere where she wasn't. There is always, they say, an element of autobiography in one's inspirations. We are, at the end, we are narcissists. I think most artists are. Next. Years I spent in Germany, again on a long posting with my husband, and that was the worst time in my life. You know, when people talk of the artist's struggle, they often feel that the struggle is the struggle in the garret, not having enough money and starving, not having anything to paint on. That, I've been through that as well. We've been there, done that. But the true struggle of the artist is to be in contact with your muse. And if your muse deserts you, I think that happens with writers as well, when you have, it's akin to a writer's block, that you just feel completely adrift and lost. And for the first 6 months in Germany, I simply, for the first time in my life, I couldn't paint. Otherwise, I paint every day of my life. I could not paint. And then I found in the attic of a neighbor, a very, very old German lady, who very kindly said, you can come and make a mess and paint in my attic. Tante Put, we called her, Aunt Put. And I also realized her stories began to impinge on a lot of my work, because we'd always seen the World War through the eyes, we are all Anglophiles in a way, aren't we? I'm speaking in English. That we saw it from the point of view of England and the Allies. But there, living in Germany, North Germany, I suddenly saw the war from the point of view of the Germans, who had almost lost everything. They bombed out cities, and there were no men left. She had brought up her 3 children all alone. The women in Germany cleared the rubble of Bremen and other cities. We were in Kiel. And anyway, in her attic, I found this medical book, which had these pop-up pictures, where you have the human body, and then you pop up one and you see the muscles, and then you pop up the other one, and then you see the bones, and so on. And I suddenly got inspired by that, thinking really that there's almost nothing that is as beautiful and as compactly, I mean, even from an artistic point of view, when we talk of composition, how do you fill a canvas? And our human body, if you open it, I think my father was a surgeon, so I also grew up looking at his medical books. Everything is so beautifully packed together. And so I started doing this whole series of the open heart. It wasn't until years later that I was in Mexico and saw Frida Kahlo's painting with the open hearts. I've always felt a great empathy with her, though we belong in a different era, different century really. So I started doing this whole painting, and I was also sometimes accused of being a little prophetic. Somebody once called me a witch. Because in this painting you see the man with the scar, and a year or two later, I think it was 2 years later, my husband had open heart surgery, and he now bears that same scar. Next. The crow, which dominates many of my paintings, not dominates, but he entered, this used to be a crow when I lived in Bombay, which was such an urban place that you never saw any other wildlife except the crow. And he's such an urban bird. He would, same crow would come every day to the balcony where I painted. And finally he just insinuated himself into the painting, and there he remained for many years. But you also see the kites flying in the distance, and the sea. We were always the sea in the background. Next. There he is again. Next. I painted this, was perhaps the first window that I painted, the idea of the interior and the exterior beyond the window. Of course, you know, the event, the essential art event is the creation of a painting, but afterwards the critics go to town. And one of the critics said that, you know, as a young student, she was so free in Paris. She hitchhiked all over Europe. She did whatever she wanted. And now she's married and she's trapped behind closed windows and closed doors. And he said the horizon beyond beckons very alluringly to this woman who is now trapped. Next. But what happened was, I think I'd like to talk about something that happens in art, which very many painters don't acknowledge, but it happens fairly in secret, what I call a happy accident, which then leads you in a different direction. One day, O.P. Jain, who's a friend of mine, was having an exhibition in Delhi, and I was in Bombay, and he said, I want you to send me one of your window paintings, meaning the painting that, the previous one that you saw. And I went and I found in our garage this window, and I didn't have time to go to a framer. I quickly hammered the painting onto the back of the window. The panes were missing. And that gave really birth to a whole genre, and I painted those windows for many years after that, and unfortunately it became tremendously popular. And I will talk about popularity later, because I've said that, often said that the worst enemy of creativity for an artist is one's admirers, because they trap you in the paintings that they've got used to and they like. I call it the Hussein's horse syndrome, where everybody wanted a Hussein's horse. And everybody started wanting these windows. So then after a few years I abruptly stopped. But that didn't stop another huge wave of artists then latching on to that and doing the same thing. Next. There you have, I used to go to the Kabadi Bazaar in Muhammad Ali Road. And as Kali had said, I was really fascinated, said that I was fascinated by the urban mess. Always has some elements for inspiration, and especially windows. I think I must be something of a voyeur, but I can go down a street and look at those windows and wonder what about the life that's going on inside, behind that window. What's happening? Who's there? What stories are being played out? This is inspired by my friend Astad Debu. This is actually a very recent painting. All my earlier work seemed to be very grounded, very still, whereas now, because of seeing that amazing performance of Astad's with his drummers from Manipur, the figures have begun to fly a bit. Next. There you see again the everyday objects. That's my little niece who was born in England, and I used to take her to the park, and you see the clothes hanging on the line, the swings, the balloons and kites, and her toys. There's a little dead mouse. As I said, there's always the nasty surprise. So there's a dead bird or mouse on the bed, and a jug, which brings me back to the often critics have said how a woman painter's world tends to be a bit different, and I acknowledge that certainly your world shrinks to a certain extent when your children are small and you can't really be out and about, to spaces where everyday objects get repeated as and they become, by repetition, they become symbols. Of course, there's the danger that those very symbols become cliches, and then you must abandon them and try and move on to the next phase. Next. The chair really occurs a lot in my work. In fact, I've always been a figurative painter, almost always been a figurative painter, even when abstraction was so much in vogue. I continued to paint the figure, the human figure, and I've always argued that it's very difficult to live in India and not be influenced, moved, or inspired by human beings, because we are so many, and they are all around us, especially in the Basti where I work. There are hundreds of kids, and hundreds of those children are in and out to my studio, and they call me Dadi, so my world is really very peopled. But wherever I paint the chair, even when I don't have a figure in the painting, there is a feeling that the protagonist has just walked out, just left, and there's usually some traces of their presence. Here there's a little Kamadhenu. The crow has flown in through the open window and is examining the lone chair, but the lone chair also represents the person, the one who has gone, the one who has left. Next. Here there's a combination of my chair paintings, the crow, but also an attempt to deconstruct, to break it up and then reassemble it in different ways. I did that a lot with many of the chair paintings, where or many of the paintings where I would cut the painting up into bits and then reassemble them. And the window paintings serve very much as a grid for that kind of experiment. Next. This was an exhibition called Follies in Fantastical Furniture, where I found in Madras an old chair staying at a friend's house. I had nothing to paint, and I'm a compulsive painter. I have to keep painting. So she got a little annoyed with me and said, well, there's that old chair, why don't you paint that, since there was no canvas around. And that's the first one that I did. And then this was Sharan Apparao, a gallery owner, and she said, why don't we have an exhibition of painted objects? So we would go and trawl and forage in an old canal where there are hundreds of pieces of very strange furniture used to be dumped. And finally did this exhibition in Bombay called Follies in Fantastical Furniture. It was frivolous and it was funny, but it was almost the first time somebody was doing work that was funny, because I find that Indian art particularly took itself so seriously, and then people would walk through galleries as though it was a cathedral, very quietly and, you know, reverentially. And I wanted to break that feeling of reverence and make furniture, art objects that you could use, that you could sit on, because that's very much in our tradition. We are not by nature people who throw away anything. In every house you'll find bundles of stuff on top of cupboards which you've kept for generations, wondering that one of these days it'll become useful. And I think we all suffer from that. So this exhibition happened, but actually the intent was also very serious, though it was funny and people laughed when they came to the exhibition. That was great fun. But inadvertently, next, there's that Kamal Hassan chair, I think. Yeah. But inadvertently, I also created one of the first installations. I never heard of the word, but one of the things that daunted me was that half these objects were being made in Madras and half were being made in Delhi. And there were 53 huge objects. And I said, how on earth are we going to transport all this? I didn't want to create this mound of garbage of plastic and paper. So I hit upon the idea of wrapping them in razais. And I bought 100 razais, very cheap in those days, 100 rupees each, I think. And we wrapped all this in razais. When I got to the Jahangir Art Gallery in Bombay, the director said, well, we don't have any place to store all this stuff. So it was all dumped in a huge mound in the middle of the gallery. And it was such fun because people thought that was one of the artworks. And children would dive into it and lovers would sit there holding hands on these mound of razais. And a very nice thing actually happened. On the last day when many of the objects amazingly got sold, I didn't ever think they would be. There was still a heap of razais left, and Sharan Appara, who'd helped me with the show, she and I went out into the night with these razais, and we covered many, many sleeping people on the pavement. So the whole cycle, there was no waste, and I think we'd said something, inadvertently maybe. Next. My son was a computer software, I think, mothers always think, genius. And he told me, you think I'm a nerd, but I can tell you that computers can be very, very creative. And this was back in around the 98 or 99. And so he persuaded me to try to use computers to do some new work. And after all, art is about creating an image, and by whatever means. And today young artists have so much more freedom than we did, because all kinds of means are at their disposal where they can create images. But here what I did was to morph or overlap 3 different phases of my work in each work. And that was an exhibition held in New York called Mutations. And it was really the first computer work that was seriously being done in India. Next. There's another one, again morphed, of 3 different paintings combined. Next. This is a very large work. It's the same woman, it's called Mutations, it's the same woman mutating in different ways. In the last one, you see she has a little boy holding her little son. In this one, she's lost her head, the second one. And this is at the National Gallery in Delhi. Next. That is another one of my so-called kitsch works, where we've used elements from a calendar. So there was an element of parody there, where one engaged, but one also mocked at what was, by isolating pieces from calendar art, one could create a kind of a new image. Next. There's a chair, and the Lakshmi's lotus is flying in the sky like a balloon. Next. Always the sea. That's an image from the circus, and the male figure has golden specks from the Tanjore painting, and the little boy has been cut in half, and even the silver foil on the saw is real silver. Again, the technique from the Tanjore paintings, and the tiger, of course. I'd always wanted to sculpt, never had the opportunity because we led such a peripatetic life, always traveling, never having a permanent studio. And then I got this opportunity. Somebody asked me if I'd like to go to Murano to make sculptures in glass. And that was a fantastic experience. I had many, many sessions. I'd go to Venice and then hang out in Murano over short periods, like 14 days at a time. And I created two different exhibitions of about 50 pieces each of crystal. And it was called the Sacred Prism. So though the glass was in Italy, and I worked with the glass blowers of Cenedisi, which was a very old glass blowing firm in Murano, many of the images were from Indian mythology or iconography. Next. The shivlings, there were many of these. What this did for me was that it gave me the opportunity to have not only the third dimension, but the fourth dimension, which is the dimension of light. That glass would transform itself depending on how it was lit, or if it was backlit, and creating that same object would metamorphose into different kinds of forms depending on how it was lit. Next. It's another shivling. They're quite large, they're about that size, and they weigh about 5 to 10 kilos each. Next. Next. This is the big triptych, which is about 8 feet or 9 feet tall, and this is the one that has been acquired by the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, and it's about, as you all know, about the Kavadiyas. I made a small film that was shown, and they had this painting and all the drawings and studies that led up to it in an exhibition which they kept on for 6 months. In fact, I was very lucky because till this exhibition, Museum in San Francisco had never showed modern or contemporary art. They were dedicated to ancient art. They'd had a wonderful Tanka exhibition the year before. And there were two of us. There was a Chinese painter who painted the Three Gorges and my triptych that was shown for 6 months. Next. Again, some critic remarked that after having been in Murano, the influence of glass had come into the work, and you see that the central, perhaps that's true, because the central figure is almost transparent, and the angel flying in the sky is also transparent. But again here, my goat people who so dominate my life. Next. This is a very large triptych again, where I show the mother goddess with the modern appurtenances of power. You can't see it very closely, but she has an atom, a pistol, of course a paintbrush, and so on. In another version of this, the demon's head is that of Veerappan. Not in this one though. Next. This is the mural at the Bombay arrivals airport. The middle one again is one of the windows, and it has a mirror, so that and it's at the end of a corridor, so as the passengers are approaching it, they see their own image in the mirror and become part of the mural. Next. This is the mural called Peace, which was in the VIP lounge, the one where the Prime Minister would receive his visitors in the airport in Delhi for about 35 years. And then they were demolishing this airport, and I was very afraid that the painting would get demolished as well. Fortunately, it was on board, on panels of board, and Nirupama Rao, just before she left as ambassador to America, she actually had it rescued, and it now is installed in the new MEA building in Delhi, in the banquet hall. So that's again a very large work. That's also 9 feet. In fact, to install it in the new building, they had to cut 6 inches because they didn't have enough ceiling space. Next. This is a very large fiberglass mural, which is in the ITC hotel lobby in Baroda, and it was of a street. I've done another street thing which I'll show you later, which is just finished for the T3 airport in Bombay. And this is the last one. This is the one that I've just finished, You don't see the whole thing here, but it's called the Walled City. And it talks of a street anywhere in India really. And I've written a text that goes with it, which says that the street is not a place, in India, a street is not a place that takes you from one place to the other. It's a place where we live. It is the place where people do their commerce, they have their weddings, they have their fights, they have their processions, they have their political rallies. The street is really where people live. And there are all sorts of elements. It's rather frivolous because I wanted it to be something positive and jolly, a bit unlike my otherwise necrophiliac work. So it has a balloon, it has an Air India plane flying in the sky, a domed building, which the airport did not allow me to call a mosque. They said they did not approve of that, and I was rather cross. And there's the Golcha cinema with a big poster of Amitabh Bachchan and the children playing. There's a goat. My goat is always there now. And there's a cow and auto rickshaws and taxis. And it's all the things that, and we all coexist on that street with animals and people and vehicles of all kinds. So I think the street is very important to Indian life. Thank you. How are you coming up?
She, by the way, mentioned that I stopped painting for 6 months. I paint every day. In College of Art, we were taught that you have to make 100 sketches every day. I wonder how many of us do it. But like Bhimsen Joshi ji, like Pandit Jasraj ji, or any of those doyens of Indian, Riyaz is a must. Even at this age, having attained all what could be, and maybe much more she will do, but Riyaz is a must.